Right, good morning and welcome to the Cabinet meeting. As usual, this is being broadcast live via the County Council's website. It'll be archived so you can view it afterwards. Would everyone please remember to switch their microphone on before they speak and turn it off when they've finished speaking. Apologies for absence. We have one apology from Nick Rushton, the leader, who's attending the Regional Infrastructure Summit in Leicester today. There you go. So take the minutes, item 1, post motion. I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of December 2018 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Urgent items. There are no urgent items I've been made aware of. Are there any declarations of interest? I don't see any. So we'll move to item 4, which is the Provisional Medium-Term Financial Strategy 2019-20 to 2022-23. It's on pages 9 to 216 in your packs. So the first report that we're considering today sets out the Council's proposed medium-term financial strategy for that period, following its consideration by the overview and scrutiny bodies in January and receipt of the local government finance settlement last week. The Cabinet is asked to agree that the proposals are submitted to the Council meeting on the 20th of February for approval. I would like to thank everyone who took time to respond to the consultation on the MTFS, and in particular the Overview and Scrutiny Committees and the Scrutiny Commission, whose comments are set out in Appendix O to this report. As the report makes clear, the pressure on our finances continue. Unlike other councils, we can balance our budget for the next 2 years. We've made a successful bid to the government to keep more business rates, which has given us an extra £6 million towards roads, broadband and the local economy. But it's simply not right that Leicestershire receive such low levels of funding, and we will continue to do all we can to press for a new national funding system, and there's more on that in the next report. We have with us today Chris Tambini, Director of Corporate Resources, and Declan Keenan, Assistant Director, Strategic Finance and Property. So Chris, would you like to introduce the report?
Thank you. Yeah, the draft MTFS was approved for consultation just before Christmas, and as Mr. Rose has just set out, over the last 6 weeks or so, it's been considered by the scrutiny committees and the Commission, and there's also been a public consultation. The detailed results of the public consultation are included on page 161 of the report. Overall, the results are supportive of the MTFS proposals, including those around council tax, growth and savings. And from the analysis of the comments from the public consultation, I think the key concerns were focused around maintaining an effective early help service and also effective transport services. The comments from the Scrutiny Commission are also attached. The key changes since the December report are set out in page 13, paragraph 13 of the report. And I think the biggest one I'll highlight is the extra money that we received from the successful application to be a business rate pilot. That's 6.6 million. This will be allocated to the Future Development Fund and will be there to meet the cost of infrastructure and other capital, which is a major pressure for the County Council. So that extra income is a real bonus. I do know that the Cabinet have had the same message from me, from Declan, before me, from Brian Roberts, and before Brian Roberts, Pat Sartoris, and that is that we are under extreme pressure and the outlook is extremely challenging. That hasn't changed. The MTFS includes £75 million worth of savings. They're set out in detail £35 million worth of that savings target, and there's also a £20 million gap by the time we get to year 4 of the MTFS. On top of that, we need to make a further £20 million worth of savings to bring the high needs budget back into balance. There's also major uncertainty. But by this time next year, we should have the results of the Fair Funding Review, the Business Rate Retention Review, and also the Comprehensive Spending Review. And as Cabinet know, these are key to our future prospects. I will, however, end with a little bit of positive news. With the savings within the MTFS, we are balanced for the next 2 years. And in achieving that, we've managed to avoid using reserves, managed to avoid any borrowing, and I say the budget is balanced. I have looked at a couple of other county council MTFSs over the last couple of weeks or so, and I must admit none of them have managed to achieve that. So I think we're in a reasonable position, even though it is challenging. The recommendations are set out on the order paper.
Right. Thank you, Chris. I think I would add to your comments before I do that we've also, in our MTFS, in each forward years, we've anticipated further reductions in business rate funding, recognising that government is still under pressure to fund local government. Whereas when one looks at the forecasts in other councils, they haven't done that. They're assuming that this year will be the last year of austerity, encouraged to do that by certain comments of government ministers, whereas we do have this understanding of broader aspects of government finance, where so much money is going into the health service. Nothing wrong with that, but it does put pressure on other services, and we foresee that local government will continue to have a reduction in its funding, but we shall see. But at least we are provided for, and we can still balance the books for the next 2 years. Do you want to comment further on that?
I mean, I must say, we have taken a prudent approach to the MTFS. So we made a prudent approach in terms of what we think the outcome of the Fair Funding Review will be. A good example of that. I'm kind of hopeful that maybe this time next year I am kind of sitting here kind of giving a little bit of a more positive kind of message. But there are huge uncertainties, and I would caveat by that by saying that generally our forecasts have been accurate over the last 10 years, but hopefully they're wrong this time.
I'm not sure what to say to that. But I will move the motion on the order paper. Richard, would you second? Richard Shepherd.
Thank you, Chairman. Happy to second that. And I mean, we've heard from Byron, we've heard from Chris Tambini, both given a very clear and concise outline of the situation. There's nothing really to add to that, but I'm happy to second it, Chairman.
It's been proposed and seconded. Any further speakers? No, there are none. So moved and seconded. Those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. So we can now move to the next item, which is item 5. We continue to have Chris and Declan here. And this is the responses to consultations on local authorities' relative needs and resources and business rates retention reform. That's on page 217 to 232 of the pack. So this report seeks our approval for the proposed responses to 2 consultations from the government. The first relates to a number of aspects of the Fair Funding Review. As I said earlier, we think that the present formulae are unfair, and there should be a system that encourages all councils to be efficient and recognises local differences in need. The second consultation concerns proposed changes to the business rates retention scheme, and as our response indicates, we would particularly like to see a change and an appropriate split of the income between counties and districts. And of course that arises because 80% of business rates growth currently goes to the district, only 20% to the county, and 80% of new homes bonus goes to the districts and only 20% to the county. And yet if you look at the spending, those two figures are reversed. So Chris, would you take us through the report?
I'm going to focus on the Fair Funding Review because I kind of think that's the most important one. And Byron's already mentioned we are the lowest funded county council in the country. We're also the 4th lowest sort of area in terms of the 150 upper tier areas in the country as well in terms of funding. And the current formula really does benefit London, particularly in the London authorities, and penalises places outside London, particularly county councils. I must admit, I was trying to count up how many consultations we've had since the Fair Funding Review was launched. I think we're on our 4th. And this is probably our most positive response we've made to any of them so far. And it does look like the MHCLG are starting to kind of accept some of our arguments. The inclusion of the foundation formula, which covers a range of services, and it's far simpler from the current arrangements, and also doesn't double count things like density and deprivation, is a real step in the right direction. I think it's a real kind of positive development. There is one caveat around the consultation, is that it says fairly little around the adults formula and the children's formula. We're particularly concerned about the adults formula because some of the wording within the consultation does indicate it looks like they're going to try and replicate what the current formula, which doesn't particularly benefit kind of county areas or Leicestershire. And it's worth noting that if you add up the adults and children's spend, that's about 60% of the county council spend. So those two formulas are really, really quite important to us. And our concerns around those areas are set out in the consultation. In terms of the business rates point, I think Byron's kind of made it. The key issue is around the 80-20 split, and we think that should be reversed 80-20 in favour of county councils. The key reason for that is with growth comes a real demand around infrastructure, and we need that money to fund some of the infrastructure demands, particularly transportation, that comes with growth in the local area.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. Richard, well, first of all, I will move the motion on the order paper. Richard, would you like to second it?
Yes, Chairman, happy to second that.
Yeah, it's been moved and seconded. Any comments from members? No? All those in favour? Show. Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Declan. Now, at this point, I can say welcome to Jane Moore, Director of Children and Family Services. This item is the recommissioning of domestic abuse and sexual violence services on pages 233 to 240 of your packs. The report outlines work that has been undertaken to date on the future provision of domestic abuse and sexual violence services across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland area, and asks the Cabinet to agree to a consultation exercise on the proposed structure of the services. So we have with us, as I said, Jane Moore, and she's here to present the report, and after that I'll ask Ivan Old as the Cabinet lead to speak. Jane.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to outline the recommissioning work that's being undertaken to date, but also to present to you the future ideas around the commissioning of domestic abuse and sexual violence, but also to seek approval to go out and consult. So just by way of background, the County Council currently jointly commissions domestic abuse and sexual violence services with Leicester City and Rutland and the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. And the service is currently provided by a consortium of voluntary sector providers known as UAVA. The contract began on the 1st of December 2015 and it's due to end at the end of March 2020. We've detailed in paragraph 20 the additional provision that we do commission over and above the LLR contract to address domestic abuse and sexual violence. So following a review of the current service model and combined with a review of the need across the sub-region, we are proposing a revised delivery model and with the aim of meeting future demand within the available resources. So in paragraphs 23 to 24, we've detailed the recommissioning plans that are being led by the LLR redesign group, and we've set out the proposals for the redesign in paragraphs 26. So just in relation to consultation, subject to the agreement of Cabinet and the other three commissioning bodies, it is proposed that the proposals will be subject to public consultation. We have been somewhat optimistic in terms of the timescales for the consultation. And you'll note that we are proposing currently that the consultation starts in February. We think that these timescales will slip and therefore the timing of the report back to Cabinet will slip. However, it won't impact on the direction of travel and the work will remain unchanged. So we now think that the consultation will take place after May, which will then be done in a much more measured way. So I put the recommendations to you as set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Ivan.
Thank you, Chair. I've attended 3 meetings already at the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner with colleagues from Rutland and the City and officers to look at the ongoing contract position of domestic violence, which has a major impact in families and on individuals within families, obviously including children. PERDA clearly is a factor that comes up which is going to affect the ability to hold the consultation within the timescale outlined in the report. However, I will move the recommendations on the Green Order paper. From a personal viewpoint, it's paragraph 26, which I think is the really critical viewpoint. There are a number of suggestions here that will shape the County Council's response to the proposals as they stand at the moment. And if I were to pick out one, it is C. Current service supports victims of domestic abuse and sexual violence who are 13 years of age and older. County Council proposes that domestic abuse support for children and young people is delivered as part of its wider children's services with staff who have specialist training. We'll cross the bridge when we come to it if we want to go down that route, and neither the city or Rutland choose to do that. We'll have to put that in the report back to Cabinet, but there are some pretty serious questions there, and we do need good engagement with the consultation.
Yes, thank you, Ivan. Yeah. Pam.
Thank you, Leader. I think this is a really good report that sets out exactly our thinking and where we're thinking of going. I think it's a really sad fact of modern day life that these incidents are increasing, and that children particularly are exposed to these things which could actually shape the way that they spend their adult lives. And I think anything we can do to help work with that and give them a better chance of living a decent adult life is to be focused on. So I have no hesitation in seconding this motion on the Green Order paper.
Right, thank you, Pan. Any other speakers? I don't see any. All in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jane. We now move to item 7, the NHS Community Services redesign and development of integrated health and care services. That's on page 241 to 250 of your packs. This is a report about the NHS Community Services redesign programme in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. That is work to integrate community-based social care and health services. It's been led by the 3 CCGs, but it may have significant implications for the County Council. We have with us today Cheryl Davenport, Director of Health and Care Integration, to present this report, and also Peter Davis, who will be supporting Cheryl. And then I will ask Pam Posnett, and after they've spoken, I will ask Pam Posnett and Richard Blunt to say a few words. Cheryl.
Thank you. Good morning. This report provides an update on a piece of work being led by the 3 CCGs, and it considers future models of community services and how these should be redesigned. Leicestershire County Council is a key partner to this work, and there are implications for adult social care, particularly in areas of services where we're integrating ways of working between the local authority and NHS services. Examples of these would be hospital services, hospital discharge, reablement, and supporting people to remain independent at home. Paragraph 7 of the report indicates that the Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee considered the proposals for the work on the 21st of January and were supportive of the direction of travel. You will see in paragraphs 10 to 17 the links between this work and the Council's strategic plan outcomes, particularly in terms of wellbeing and opportunity, keeping people safe and great communities, as well as how this links with the Adult Social Care Strategy and the Better Care Fund, along with the fact that the new NHS plan sets out a number of commitments about community services and how these should be improved and integrated. Looking at paragraphs 32 and 33, you'll see the objectives of the work to redesign services. These include improving integrated care and taking a home-first approach to where care should be delivered. The scope of this work will examine how much care could or should be provided in people's own homes and what this means for resource levels for community nursing and therapy services, and the capacity that then is needed in our community hospitals and hospital beds in the community in the future. Paragraphs 34 to 39 present initial evidence supporting the case for change. Here it highlights that we are currently under-resourced for areas like district nursing and therapy service when benchmarked with other areas, and that patients are often not in the correct setting for their care. So the new models of community care aim to address this. And there are 3 elements to the new models that are being proposed. There's neighbourhood community nursing, and this is where our social care teams work hand in hand with community nursing in the community. Home First, which focuses on hospital discharge and reablement, again, much of this work jointly with social care. And then the third area is the bed-based care in the community. Adult social care is already engaged in testing some new ways of working as part of multidisciplinary teams and some integrated reablement. There's some pilots currently underway about those areas of work. So following further evaluation and certainly further demand and capacity modelling, we will be assessing the implications of these new models of care on social care, and more detail on that will be available later in 2019. Paragraph 55 indicates that some further public engagement events are being planned in February and March. There was some early engagement undertaken by the CCGs in the autumn of 2018, but the engagement events that are coming up in the next month or so are looking to engage the participation of council officers, and dates have now been confirmed and published for these events. As set out in the recommendations, Cabinet is asked to note the scope of the work, support the development of these new models of care, and the involvement of council officers in the public engagement, and finally that a further report be submitted to Cabinet later in 2019, setting out the feedback from the engagement and the implications that this work will have in detail. That will include the implications for the Better Care Fund and also adult social care itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. I mean, it's just fairly extensive stuff, isn't it? And could bring about considerable change. Right, I'll call on Mrs. Pam Posnett, who's lead member for Health, to move the motion on the order paper.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, this is a very in-depth paper, but it does explain fully how we look at delivering a service in the future and putting health and social care together where the outcomes for patients will be much better. And I think the general population will welcome the neighbourhood community nursing into their local areas. And certainly we've got a good relationship and history of working in partnership to deliver schemes like this. And I have no hesitation whatsoever in proposing this motion on the Green Order paper.
Thank you, Pam. I'll turn now to Richard Blunt, lead member for adult social care and communities, and he'll second the motion.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'm cautiously optimistic. As an optimist, I think this is the sort of thing that we should support. There are those in the room who think NHS will never change, but the bottom line is if they can learn from us, most of the things that we do, most of the papers you see, is where we're making savings and refining how we deliver the service, often better, which you'll see on libraries later on. And on many things, children's services, adults, we try and target the money where it's needed. But we only control part of the agenda, and the NHS control the great majority of it. So as an optimist, I believe the only way the NHS can move forwards is to learn from us. And that's why this is a type of work that could lead to a better use of all our public money that really at the moment is divided between huge silos of the NHS and then the smaller silo of us. And I think they can learn from us. So I'm cautiously optimistic, Chairman. Happy to second.
Okay, thank you. Any other speakers? I see none. Are we all in favour of this then? Yeah? Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Peter. We'll move on to item 8. And this is the NHS long-term plan. We still have Cheryl Davenport with us, but we're not also now being joined by the Director of Public Health, Mike Sands. So this report concerns the NHS long-term plan. It outlines a number of commitments that the NHS aims to deliver over the next 10 years and the implications for the County Council. Now, we do have a number of concerns about the plan, so I'll ask Cheryl to speak first and explain what they are.
So this report considers the main priorities within the new NHS long-term plan, which was published on the 7th of January. We've provided in this report an initial analysis of the implications for council services, in particular where we work in an integrated way between health, care and other joint working within the NHS. The NHS plan is linked to a £20 billion investment which was already announced by government. It's an average of a 3.4% uplift over the next 5 years, and this document outlines various elements of policy and service priorities that should be delivered in line with that investment. Paragraphs 35 to 50 of the report summarise the high-level information on the financial framework that the NHS is expected to operate within and deliver against. This includes delivering financial balance and eliminating historical deficits. It also involves improved efficiency in the management, admin and back office areas, as well as an overall efficiency for the NHS of 1.1%. There are also specific levels of investments quoted for elements of service such as mental health and community-based care. So this is one of the first areas of concern in terms of the NHS plan, whether those financial arrangements can in fact be delivered. Paragraphs 28 to 34 of the report touch on two other policy documents that are expected to be published this year. These are very closely related to the NHS policy document in terms of how local authorities and NHS services will work together and how funding going forward will be planned. These are the Adult Social Care Green Paper and the Green Paper on NHS and Prevention, also expected later this year, although we don't have dates for these documents as yet. So again, another area of concern is how do these three documents from a policy and financial point of view fit together. Paragraphs 48 to 50 should also be noted in relation to the Better Care Fund, both in terms of the future policy framework for the Better Care Fund, which is currently undergoing a national review, but also that the Better Care Fund budget currently provides a significant contribution to adult social care's funding. This is an essential element of the department's financial plan and the council's MTFS. So the NHS plan places particular emphasis on the delivery of more integrated care in the community, a greater focus on reducing health inequalities, which Mike will touch on shortly, and the development of integrated care systems, plus a very ambitious digital programme. The digital programme aims to support customers to interface with the NHS in a digital manner and also to support staff to have much more electronic and digital solutions in their day-to-day work. Paragraph 57 to 65 summarises the statements about integrated care systems. This is about how the NHS will be configured at 3 tiers called system, place and neighbourhood. Local authorities are expected to be a key partner in these developments across all 3 of these tiers, but in particular at place, which means the population and geography of an upper tier authority area. Paragraph 66 to 69 describes the main digital developments. These include implementing digital GP services and outpatient appointments, for example, being able to do these by Skype or email, providing more mobile technology and improving the electronic communication between the NHS and its partners, such as local authorities. You will see that the plan contains many other commitments, some of which are given in the bullets in paragraph 70. For this report, we've listed those that in particular will have implications for local authorities and how we work with the NHS. So the table that then follows in the report looks at a number of these developments in more detail. The table that you will see there, if you look at section A, links to community services, that's entirely in line with the paper we've just received. But an important point here is whether any of the additional investment that's identified for community services will flow through to investment in social care support in the new models of care. Section B similarly looks at the investment plan for mental health and autism. Key point again here is is this actually a ring-fenced investment? Will the achievements be made in our local plans? And if the improvements can be actually realised locally for the benefit of our communities? We also need clarity on whether this investment for mental health will flow through to elements of social care support where we provide integrated care. Section C is then about personal budgets, a relatively new area of commissioning for the NHS. We are already scoping some of this work with our CCG colleagues. And then Section E looks at the digital developments. Aside from the points I've already made about the connection of our IT systems, we also need to think about the implications for county-wide broadband infrastructure here. I'm now going to hand over to Mike to present key points in relation to Section D of the table and other matters in the NHS plan that have implications for public health.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. So briefly, just to go through Table D. Chapter 2 of the NHS long-term plan focuses on what the NHS can do around tackling health inequalities and prevention. Having argued for some time that local government was pulling its weight around public health and prevention, but that the NHS had more to do, it's to be welcomed that the NHS plan recognises that fact with a series of commitments around services and a commitment to prevention more generally. Specific commitments are at the bottom of page 263 in the meeting pack. These include commitments to increasing smoking cessation support and support for drinkers, particularly within the hospital setting. For me, that's to be welcomed, but one would want that to join up with the existing responsibilities that we have around health improvement services and the existing community-based services we have, like Quit Ready as a smoking cessation service. Personally, I wouldn't want to see that duplicate or indeed compete with the services that we've got, although the investment's to be welcomed. More contentiously, maybe, the plan indicates the desire for a greater role for the NHS in the planning and commissioning of 3 of our bigger budget lines within public health, that being health visiting, school nursing and sexual health services. I think the plan says something along the lines of, if there is insufficient money coming from the Treasury to fully fund health visiting, school nursing and sexual health, the NHS would be, to use a phrase that isn't in the plan, would be interested in at least part funding those 3 lines. Again, one would welcome any indication from the NHS that they'd be willing to help fund some of our services. I would push back from me, in view of the kind of review of commissioning responsibilities, I'd push back on any suggestion that this is somehow that local government has failed in its commissioning responsibilities for those 3 lines, when there's national and indeed local evidence that since transition we've delivered better outcomes at much reduced cost. So the point that Mr Blunt made about the NHS learning from some of the innovation we've done, I think is well made in relation to the previous agenda item. There are sundry other commitments in there around doubling the diabetes prevention programme within the NHS, and the NHS focusing on its own commitments around tackling air pollution across its estate and across its vehicles. Lastly, the big one for me is in the first paragraph of Table D, that the NHS funding model is being adjusted to favour those areas with higher inequalities. This would recognise that there is a relationship between usage of the NHS and deprivation, but as my annual report last year focused on, again, one would argue that the real drivers of cost within the NHS are frailty and multimorbidity, to the extent which people live years, particularly in their later years, in poor health, which is as much to do with the demographic of the population as it is deprivation. So it'd be interesting to see, in terms of adjusting that funding model, what that means to demand and cost pressures within local NHS within a county area as opposed to a more urban area. So a number of commitments. Again, one can only welcome the commitment of the NHS to prevention, but it does come with a few caveats around the review of commissioning responsibilities, funding, and the join up with our existing services.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Cheryl. I'd like to make a few observations here, because I follow this area of work, although it's not my prime responsibility here. Can you tell me if this power grab that was been widely reported in the media from the NHS to take back substantial parts of public health has now been finally defeated? There seems to be there's some muddled thinking amongst some people that if you deprive a service of funding, and there's no doubt that public health has been deprived of funding in line with the rest of local government funding, it's been pushed down each year, and the amount we get has been depleted, and of course we had less than other areas to start with. that if you do that and then therefore the service has to be curtailed, it would be better off moving it to another area of public service and other budgets, and then it will all be restored. Well, that's muddled thinking on a grand scale, but we still do see it. Can you offer us any consolation on that?
Much remains to be decided because the review, or details of the review and when it will pronounce and how it will engage with us is yet to be decided. Helpfully, clear statement from the Secretary of State and from Duncan Selby as head of PHE that there is no desire to transfer public health in its entirety back to the NHS. So some people I've heard, some commentators have said that this will be a lift and shift reversing 2013. It won't be. So public health will be a responsibility of local government, as it should be, because the whole point recognises that what we do has a much greater influence on health than what the NHS does. Specifically for those three items, it would be interesting to see what comes out of the review because it is about, I think it's 53% of our entire budget is tied up in those three lines. Again, if it came to pass that the NHS wanted to part fund, fine. What the governance, what the commissioning arrangements, whether it might be some kind of joint commissioning arrangement between local government and the NHS remains to be seen. But I think the point you made about recognising it's an unusual starting point, the wording that they put in paragraph 2.4 that's caused quite rightly some disquiet. But we'll have to see what the review says.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mike. Well, I'll go now to Mrs. Posnett, lead member, to move the motion on the order paper.
Thank you, Chairman. Chapter 2 of the NHS long-term plan sets out new commitments that the NHS itself will do to improve prevention. This is, of course, to be welcomed. However, I'm not sure many people would recognise the relevance of things in the plan, like work on very low-calorie diets for obese people, to the issues that really determine whether they can lead healthy lives. For adults living with debt, with addiction, with housing or employment problems, the ability to make healthy choices will be difficult to achieve without addressing these underlying causes, which are largely being the responsibility of local government. To be blunt, prevention in the long-term plan is a bit Waitrose when the world is Aldi. Since public health came back to the County Council, the department has kept the show on the road, despite the year-on-year cuts to the public health grant. The department has achieved cost reductions in services previously commissioned by the NHS, whilst maintaining good and in many cases improved outcomes. Over the same period, it is of note that the public health responsibilities of NHS England, those to do with the screening programmes and vaccination and immunisation rates, have seen a decline in performance. At the same time, public health has developed services like First Contact Plus and local area coordinators to help people address those wider issues in life that prevent them living healthier lives. As the plan says, action by the NHS is a complement to, but cannot be a substitute for the important role of local government. It's good the NHS recognises this, but I think we'd all recognise that the plan depends on adequate funding for local government. I have no hesitation in moving this motion on the Green Order paper. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you, Pam. I totally agree with what you said, if that's any help. Can I turn now to Richard Blunt to second the motion?
Happy to second. Nothing else to add, Chairman.
Any other contributions?
Yeah, most speaks.
I don't see any. Can we have a show of hands to show we support the motion? Thank you very much. And thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Mike. And Mike stays with us for the next item, which is Active Lives Survey 2018, Physical Activity Levels in Leicestershire. This is agenda item 9. It's on pages 269 to 276. This is a report on the results of the latest Active Lives survey by Sport England, which looks at physical activity levels across the country. We're looking at this report because the results showed a worrying decline in physical activity levels in the county, and in particular in Charnwood and North West Leicestershire. Of course, the leader of the council is not here today to talk about that, but there we are. Anyway, but we do have Mike Sands still here, as I said, so let him address the issues.
Thank you, Chair. I don't quite know in the continuum of Waitrose to Aldi where I'd pitch this report. I'll leave that one to your own thoughts. As you said, this sets out the results of the latest Active Life survey by Sport England, which does highlight trends in physical activity in Leicestershire and has some interesting, I think, data within it in terms of the results. It's not within public health as if we don't measure physical activity, diet and obesity through things like the Public Health Outcomes Framework. But this survey is of a sufficient size and a comprehensiveness in what it looks like to give a bit more detail to what we normally get through our usual reporting channels, which is why it lies a little bit outside of our normal monitoring. This particular series of surveys started in 2015, and crucially, it covers a broader range of physical activities, not just sport and leisure, but it includes things like walking to work, walking for leisure, cycling to work and cycling to leisure, etc. So it gives a broader picture of what's going on within Leicestershire, although it does exclude activities such as gardening, which I suspect many people within Leicestershire would get some physical activity from their gardening. As such, as you said, Chair, it gives new information on physical activity and highlights some potentially worrying trends in activity levels across the county. To cut to the chase, it's paragraphs 14 to 17 that add the detail around this. So over the series of surveys, as highlighted in paragraph 14 and figure 1 at the bottom of page 271, the percentage of adults within Leicestershire achieving the Chief Medical Officer's recommended 150 minutes of moderate activity or more per week has fallen from 62.3% of adults achieving that level in 2015 to 59.3% in the last survey. Over the same time span, the national average has wavered a bit, but overall it's increased slightly from 62.1% to 62.3%. So although these aren't huge absolute shifts in percentages, the robust sample size does give us a degree of statistical reliability about the numbers. And what it does show is that Leicestershire's gone from being above the national average when Sport England started these surveys to being significantly below the national average at the time of the last survey. That's unusual, having celebrated in the last sort of agenda item that actually public health has done a good job about keeping the show on the road. I'd have expected us to be above the national average for this indicator. So it's certainly a personal worry to me that we've dipped below the national average. Paragraph 17 adds a bit of detail to this. It presents district level data for physical activity. And again, to highlight, there is only one district in the last survey that was above the national average, which was Harborough. And to be fair to Harborough, they'd achieved a 3.2% increase in physical activities, physical activity over the course of the surveys, although that's not statistically different from the national average. But there are some worrying trends, as you pointed out, Chair. So since the survey started, Charnwood's seen a drop in physical activity, the percentage of adults doing the recommended levels of 9.2%, and North West Leicestershire's seen a decline of 8.3%. Both of those, the bold in that table 1, highlighting where that's achieved statistical significance. So this isn't something where you say, well, it's a bit lower, but it's in line with the national average. This is a statistically significant drop. As to why this is the case, paragraphs 18 onwards, I've tried to have a look at this. So I was hoping by now that there'd be a breakdown of individual activities within Leicestershire to help put a bit of detail on what's happening. That's not available, but sort of drawing some inferences. So across the national figures, I would suggest that participation in sport itself has declined, but not very much. But where the national levels have gone up, this is driven by an increase in things, as I mentioned at the start, broader physical activity. So the walking and the cycling to work, etc., etc. For women, much the same. So an increase in walking for leisure and a decline in things like participation in individual activities, like fitness, dancing for fitness. I've looked within the paper over paragraphs 19 and 20 about whether there was any trend in what kind of authority, or is this to do with deprivation, and I can't see an obvious correlation between what kind of authority or deprivation and whether this would explain why our figures have gone up and down. It's of note that some counties like Suffolk, Nottinghamshire and Hampshire have seen a statistically significant increase in physical activity levels. Leicestershire is the only county within the country that's seen a significant decline over the same period. And as I say, there are some interesting thoughts really about those areas which have seen an increase. So Manchester, which I would expect us frankly to have better activity levels in Manchester, has seen a significant increase. As picked up, I think, by the comments of scrutiny in the paragraphs on the next page, you can make inferences. So it's not lost to me that the Mayor of Manchester, in Andy Burnham, appointed Chris Boardman to do a specific piece of work championing cycling in the Greater Manchester area, not just trying to encourage people to cycle, but putting the investment into things like Cycle Pass, the join-up of active travel systems across the Greater Manchester area. So again, I can't say for certain, but I think it's interesting that some of those areas which have seen an increase, and I've highlighted Manchester, Salford and Chorley, are those areas that you wouldn't normally expect to be associated with an increase in physical activity. Lastly, for me, the comments in paragraph 24 from the Health and Wellbeing Board are welcome. I think we'd all recognise that increasing physical activity levels is the responsibility of a number of organisations across private and public sector, with the board wanting to know more at a future meeting about the work of Leicestershire and Rutland Sport. For me, though, I would celebrate the work that organisations like Leicestershire and Rutland Sport do to increase the number of people volunteering to do sport, to participate and coach clubs. But there's something to be looked at for me about the way the whole system joins up and understanding why some districts have seen significant decreases, but others have held their own. So not a full picture, but I wanted to bring it to the Cabinet's attention because it's clearly important that we get the population of Leicestershire physically active.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mike. I'll turn now to lead member Mrs. Posnett, who may be able to explain some of the differences across the districts.
Thank you, Chairman. If only I could. I mean, I must admit that it was a